We all know that the US wants to retain its hegemonic status as the world's superpower. We also know that they're the country that want to make the rules for the rest of the world under their favourite phrase of international rules-based order. We also know that they're the country who wants to promote free trade and open markets as long as it only benefits themselves. It's also known over the last 2 to 3 decades, China has grown economically and technologically, and on a purchasing parity basis, their economy is now larger than the USA. Technologically, they've also surpassed the USA in a number of areas. The USA will have you believe that the whole world is against China and its policies to eradicate extremism and terrorism in the northern Xinjiang region. But this is simply a fabrication. The only countries pushing this narrative are the USA and its Five Eyes partners, and to some extent the European Union. And in fact, a large group of Islamic countries have sent delegates to the Xinjiang region and are more than happy with the policies that China are operating in that area. So where are these accusations coming from? They're coming from a small group of organisations and people, all funded by the USA. You have Adrian Zenz, who believes he was sent by God to destroy communism. You have ASPI, an Australian-based think tank, which is funded by states like the United Kingdom, the USA and the Australian government, as well as weapons manufacturers from the American military industrial complex. And you also have the World Uyghur Congress, again a group that is funded by the United States of America. These people and organisations make many accusations against China, but never allow themselves to be questioned or cross-examined. Much of what they say is based on speculation and hearsay rather than fact. Let me give you an example. The World Uyghur Congress held what they called a Uyghur tribunal in London. They tried to make you believe that it was a genuinely legal tribunal. They made the media believe that. However, it was nothing more than a staged production where it turns out people were paid to attend and give so-called evidence. It was not a real tribunal. The witnesses were not subject to any cross-examination, and I suspect if they were, there would have been gaping holes in the evidence they gave. One of the witnesses at Uyghur Tribunal has considerably changed her story 3 times with 3 different interviews with 3 different media outlets. Now let's talk a little bit about Michelle Bachelet and the United Nations report. Now I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, as there are already a couple of YouTubers who've covered this extensively and in depth, and I will put links to their videos in the description if you do want to get more information on that. However, what I will say is that back in May of this year, Michelle Bachelet visited China and the Xinjiang region. And during that visit, she spoke to many people here, leaders, government people, citizens, a whole range of people. And at the press conference following her visit, she was very positive and upbeat about what she'd found in China and the cooperation of the Chinese government, both now and going forward. So I find it very strange that when the report was finally issued, it was very contradictory to what Michelle Bachelet had said in her press conference. It's also worth noting that shortly after Miss Bachelet's visit to China, she announced that she was leaving her post at the United Nations. Now I don't want to speculate on this, but the question I'd ask, was she forced to resign from that position because what she was going to put in her report didn't fit the narrative that her superiors were looking for? It's also interesting that the report was released just 10 minutes before, at 10 to midnight on the last day that Miss Bachelet was in office at the United Nations. It's also very interesting and odd that she didn't put her name to the report, and there was no press conference arranged at the release of the report. This is actually quite unusual for the United Nations. I'm not going to speculate on why that may be the case, but I'll leave it up to you to draw your own conclusions from that. Something else I'd like to bring up here as well is the forced labour bill that was passed in the USA earlier this year. Now, this involved companies purchasing products from the Xinjiang region must prove that there's no forced labour used in the manufacture of those products that's anywhere in the supply chain. Now, as I've said in previous videos, the premise is that you are innocent until proven guilty, but this bill completely turns that on its head and sort of presumes guilt until proven innocent. Now, there are a number of companies that do due diligence there, and if you look at a company like Skechers, they actually put something up on their website that they conducted both announced and unannounced audits at their factories, and they had found nothing unusual or untoward at those factories. But what's even more striking is that since that bill was passed, the amount of goods that have been purchased by the USA from Xinjiang has actually increased. And a few days ago, it was also in the news that the European Union had passed a similar law, but also the amount of goods that the European Union have purchased from the Xinjiang region has also increased. So again, I'll let you draw your own conclusions from that. So now let's get on to the reason why I think that the USA continues to push these false narratives about China. Well, as I mentioned earlier in the video, it's a problem to the USA that over the last 30 years or so, China has grown massively, both economically and technologically. And as I said earlier, in certain areas, they've surpassed the USA. And this obviously seems a massive problem for them. So instead of working together with China, which would not just benefit the USA itself, but would also benefit China, and it would benefit many other countries and people around the world, the USA have defined China as an enemy, and as a consequence of that, they've imposed a number of sanctions on China. So it now seems the aim of the USA is to impede China by any means possible. And the easiest way to do that is to create human rights issues. So as I've just said, this human rights issue is a tried and tested means that the USA use. And the reason that is because it appeals, it rings an emotional bell with people. So if they believe there's people being harmed or anything like that, then it's much easier for the USA to impose sanctions and justify it to their population, even if the sanctions, like the current sanctions, are having a negative effect on their population. Take, for example, the tariffs that were applied to Chinese imported goods into the USA. Part of the reason the USA have high inflation at the moment is because of those tariffs. But the Biden administration seems too stubborn to remove those tariffs, even if that would help the people of the USA. And finally, I want to just discuss, in my opinion, why I think the US and the West are so effective at getting the false narrative about China into the heads of their citizens. Well, I think this is down to the close collaboration between Western media and Western governments. If you look at the New York Times, many people have said this should be called the CIA Times because it parrots literally everything the CIA wishes it to. Also, about a year ago, a bill was passed in the American Senate to allocate $300 million a year to fund media to spread false information about China. Now, $300 million is a huge sum of money, and I'm sure there'll be many American and other Western media outlets that will be towing the line to get their share of that $300 million. Well, I hope this video has given you a little bit of an insight into why I think these false narratives are put together by the West. What I would always sort of advise you to do is don't trust everything that you read in the Western media. Do a little bit more digging, do a little bit more research, look at some alternative media and try and get a bit more of a balanced picture of what's actually going on. You know, it's very obvious that it's causing the US a problem, that the world is changing. You know, China and Russia are coming close together. You have Iran, who's also coming into the sphere of China and Russia. You've got India, who are pretty neutral, and you've got a lot more countries now wanting to join the Shanghai cooperation. And so the US are seeing a changing world, and the US will have you believe that the world is themselves, Australia, Japan and Europe. Well, it's not. There's a lot more of the world out there. So anyway, if you did like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you do like the channel, consider hitting that subscribe button. But as always, for now, take care.